Hi all and welcome to this week's edition of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from the Straight. Today we can review Magic Millions and cover off the possibility of Australia's two major auction houses coming together with their breeze up sale. We talk about why jockeys and trainers are at loggerheads in Victoria and a time for change in the wagering industry as Tabcorp reshuffle continues. First of all, Tim, a reflection from you on the wash-up of Magic Millions week. We're both up there. You spent a bit longer up on the Gold Coast than I did. You're still up in Queensland, but sort of give us your view as to how the week evolved.
As we had our daily podcast, but it was a solid week's trade. I think across the two books is about $217 million. It's not a small amount of money, but just as we said all week, the market and the buyers just punish imperfections. Whether that's a stallion that's off the boil, the industry is very reactionary to what happened 2 weeks ago. Let alone these matings were planned in 2022. So a lot has changed in that time to the market and just fashion and what horses are popular. So, far from a disaster, as Suman Hedge, bloodstock agent, told us, it's a correction. It's not a crash. So still very healthy. It's just, I guess, the breeders aren't getting away with imperfections.
Yeah, and as you said, it's interesting when you talk about the fact that the 2022 decisions made in 2022, which is probably close to the peak of the market, are what we're sort of seeing washing out now. And I mean, how do you see what we've seen in the last couple of weeks, but probably what we've seen in the last 12 months, affecting the way in which stallion fees will be adjusted later this year, Tim?
Every year, stallion owners, they pay a lot of money for these colts off the track. They've got to get their money back, and the old metric was, 3 years, 450 mares, and the stallion owners and investors would be out. But I don't think that doesn't hold up anymore. It takes a lot longer to get your money back. Second and third season, breeders, just the risk profile's too hard to send too many mares to those sort of stallions if they prove that the market's not on them. And there will be a lot of pressure on studs to bring back their service fees in 2025. As we said, these yearlings were bred off 2022, peak of the market. Stallions, some service fees went up based on sales results rather than racetrack results because there was so much money flowing around the market. I think it was about that year 590 million. It's a lot of money through the yearling sales. So understandably, market forces, the stud farms could command higher service fees, but outside the top few in 2025, I'm certain stud farms will react. There's a lot of deals done in 2024, so it was already happening, but I think at least the published service fees in 2025 will come down on the whole.
Yeah, and there's definitely a feeling that probably those stallions in the sort of 10 to 30,000 realm are the ones that are probably going to have a bit of a haircut this year and their fees due to the way things are sort of panning out. Tim, you caught up with Magic Millions owner Gerry Harvey, a really interesting conversation to cover a few things in the aftermath of the sale there during the week. He reflected on the sale itself, but he also revealed that the two major auction houses we're talking about a merged 2-year-old sale. And here's Gerry.
It's always eventful of the Magic Millions, but I don't think quite as much it has been the last 10 or 12 days with the tracks and races washed out and, massive sale results from international money and all the rest that goes with it.
It's been an interesting week. But when you put it all together, the amount of publicity that we've got for people outside the racing industry would be second only to the Melbourne Cup.
Yep.
So the amount of publicity, and it didn't happen just in Australia. It was all over New Zealand. It was all over Ireland and the UK. So if you put it all together and look at the last 40 years or something, we haven't had that many disasters, and this one will work its way out. So when you look at the big picture, you say, I know it was bad, but in the big picture, it's very, very good because we've had this huge amount of publicity to people that are not in the racing industry, and we might capture a few of them and bring them into our industry.
Well, through Harvey Norman and your associated businesses, you're the biggest advertiser almost going around in the country. So you understand the value of publicity. You can't buy some of that publicity.
I know. And so if you're just a pure racing bloke, you don't think of it like that, I guess. But I do. And the relationship we've got with the media whether it's a TV station, a radio station, a newspaper, whatever, is huge. So they try to help us, and we help them, and it's a partnership. So overall, I'm a bit disappointed. Obviously, we all are, but overall, I think to myself, it's been pretty good. And then if this goes off on Friday night, next year we'll be talking about, a very big event, because people now understand, wow, this is very big. It's great for Queensland. It's great for Events Queensland, Tourism Queensland, Government of Queensland, Tourism Australia. Everyone gets involved because it's going right across the world.
And what do you make of the bloodstock market at the moment? It's still in book one, $205 million turned over. It's not a small amount of money.
No, and it's about 5 or 6% below last year, whatever it was. But last year was very strong. This year is still very strong. So it's strong in that upper end of the market. It's pretty weak in the bottom end of the market. I'm a bit disappointed in that, I guess. But we'll work on it.
Yep. There's still money to be made, and those that play a longer-term view of the industry will survive, do you think, and keep breeding?
Oh, yes. The number of horses bred every year drops every year. So that's another problem. So you've got to look at the cost of breeding horses and what you can sell them for. And it's difficult. It's a labour of love. So the ones like me, I don't make any money, I lose money.
Yeah.
And so people, I'm fortunate that I can afford to lose money, but I'm not happy about it probably, and there's others like me. But if you're a guy out there trying to make a living out of it, it's pretty difficult. Then there are people that do it, so it's not impossible.
And on the state of the 2-year-old sale, obviously, New Zealand bloodstock arguably leads the way in that space down here. Magic Millions in Inglis has sort of gone head-to-head for a lot of years, and arguably pre-COVID, Magic Millions had market share over Inglis. How have you arguably, your Magic Millions probably copped the brunt of that during COVID?
Yeah, well, England, there's three of us. There's New Zealand Bloodstock, Inglis and Magic Millions. We all play our part. Over the years, market shares vary, and New Zealand Bloodstock used to be huge. They've fallen away a lot because of the prize money in New Zealand. It hasn't matched what it is in Australia. Magic Millions grew faster than anyone else over a period of 20, 25, 30 years. And at the moment, you've got Inglis and Magic Millions battling it out there at the top end of the market and the bottom end of the market. So there's a thought that we should combine and do a sale for ready-to-run sale to match New Zealand, so that Inglis would do it one year and Magic Millions would do it the next year. And that way we would be a better competitor to the New Zealand business. But maybe we do that, maybe we don't.
Have you approached Inglis about that, Mark Webster?
No, Mark Webster and I talked about it some years ago, and I was talking to him the other day, and I said maybe we should have another talk about it, whether we do anything or not. It's something that we should probably talk about. Neither of us probably want to, do it, but if it's for the best interests of the racing industry, then maybe we should put away our fighting swords and, try and do something together. That's something we want to talk about.
Because it is, obviously, with the demise of Singapore, who those buyers probably took up the $100,000 to $250,000 horses. Now it's largely rests on the Hong Kong market. Every draft probably needs a Hong Kong horse to get them by, and it's not easy to get those horses and then to pass the vets, of course, as well.
Yeah, and that's interesting because they get the Hong Kong buyers over there much, much better than we get them here in Australia for that ready-to-run sale. But they also get Australian buyers over there buying at that ready-to-run sale. And the Australian buyers don't tend to buy at the Australian ready-to-run sale. So there's an obvious gap there. And so that's why we probably should be talking about this business, about whether we do something together, because we might both be better off doing it that way.
Are plans in place at the moment that there's the two separate Australian 2-year-old sales for 2025?
There's no plans at the moment.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And you'll no doubt, you're one of the main vendors, obviously, at the Magic Millions 2-year-old sales. So
yep.
I'm sure you'll have a...
Yeah, well, It'll be interesting if I've got 50 horses of mine in the English sale. That'll be interesting. It would happen. So, that's interesting.
Thanks very much, Gerry. I appreciate that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, interesting stuff from Gerry there, Tim. I mean, your thoughts? Do you see it happening that in that 2-year-old market, which obviously those sales are usually later in the year, October, November? Do you think that it's a possibility that we will see in the next couple of years there'll be just one Australian breeze up sale?
Look, at the moment, sort of pre-COVID, Magic Millions held market share over Inglis, as Gerry and I discussed. Now Inglis have invested a lot of money and time and effort over the last 5 years to sort of capture some of that market share from New Zealand and particularly Magic Millions. What's in it? At the end of the day, yes, for the good of the industry, it would be a lot easier for vendors, for the vital Hong Kong market to only travel down to Australia once and then New Zealand once, sort of probably a month to 6 weeks apart. But then their businesses at the end of the day, what is in it for Inglis at the moment? And I can't see what that is unless Gerry and Magic Millions really make a compelling offer. Gerry's made billions out of retail. He's not going to shut his Harvey Norman store because there's a Good Guys across the road, and alternate it weekends open or anything like that, is he? So it's sort of similar to that. And I guess for vendors, yes, it would be easier, but they will, if Inglis is seen as the better sale, that's where they'll go.
It's an interesting one, isn't it? I think that there's a few things at play here. It costs a lot of money to put on these sales, Tim. I guess that's part of the challenge that they're trying to manage. And there's talk, rumours around some rationalisation of the yearling sales calendar as well in the future, whereby it's just harder and harder for these sales companies to justify the expense given the way in which the digital market works as well. So you kind of feel like there will be some shake-up over the next 2 to 3 years, but whether that's takes a form of a merged sale or not, we'll just have to see what happens, won't we?
Yeah, as you touch on it, there was a push a few years ago and it never got off the ground, probably credit to Inglis, to withstand the pressure that Melbourne Premier should go at the same time or around the same time or before Karaka, which break tradition of probably the last 20, 30 years. Everyone, yes, they're competitors, but it's an ecosystem. Everyone needs to succeed for the breeders and everyone to keep money flowing around and everyone getting their cut.
Well, we're on Magic Millions, Tim. The race day now Friday night in prime time. We won't necessarily do a preview of the meeting itself because people do like to listen to this podcast across the week. But it's now in prime time with the Big Bash cricket, which is significantly enough. I think if my memory serves me correct, it's the Sydney, whatever they call it, the big match between the two Sydney sides. Do you feel like, obviously last week was really disappointing. We were sitting there on the Gold Coast, not at the racetrack, but at a pub in Broadbeach, watching the weather come in, going, this is not good, and not surprisingly they called it off. And I think last Sunday was the wettest day on the Gold Coast in 2 years or something. So clearly it was just weather is weather. You can't do much about that. But might it be a blessing in disguise, Tim, that the Magic Millions get to take their product to a whole new audience in prime time with their big races tomorrow night?
Absolutely. There's two things at play here. I did check the Australian Open tennis draw earlier. At this stage, Friday's schedule's not out, but I don't think there's any Aussies at this stage playing Friday night. So that
is there any Aussies left on the tournament, Tim? Anyway,
yeah, Big Bash has been outrating the tennis. I think on Friday night, sort of around 2 million plus Australia-wide viewership. So huge audience, and this is how much 2 minutes notice matters. The Magic Millions Giro Classic will be run at 6:03 Queensland time, I think it is. So just before the cricket kicks off, and Channel 7 too have to cut to an ad before the cricket starts. So there's a lot of pressure on, if you're a barrier attendant anywhere in southeast Queensland, get to the Gold Coast and you'll get a job making sure you get those horses into the barriers on time and jump, and then in front of a huge audience, cut to an ad, and then the first ball will be bowled at in Sydney.
Yeah, no, fascinating one. I think, as I said, it could prove a great fillip for them, just to get that exposure. And it's, racing coexisting with other sports and being part of that narrative, I think, is important going forward, especially in a time where the competition for eyeballs is as strong as ever. Tim, I also just wanted to touch on a story that I covered earlier on the week. We've there's been this ongoing issue in Victoria since December 1 that senior jockeys haven't been riding in jump outs at major venues across Victoria because of that they're demanding that they get paid for the jump outs. So there's a dispute between the Victorian Jockeys Association and the Australian Trainers Association about who pays, how it is. Basically, the lay of the land is as we see it, right? There's the jockey said we need to get paid the same as we get paid for official trials. Now, just to define, official trials are run by Racing Victoria. The jump outs are run by the club. The jump outs have basically evolved into a budget version of trials, right? So they're not the same as trials because they don't operate under the rules of racing. They don't operate under the auspices of Racing Victoria. They're operated by the clubs. They were initially sort of put up as sort of a training device to get horses to sort of get ready for sort of a race day / trial environment. They've now evolved into sort of a pseudo trial. So the jockeys have said, well, if they're a pseudo trial, they're being used for wagering purposes, effectively to inform people. Why are we not getting paid for them? The idea was before that you'd ride a horse in a jump out and then you'd probably get the opportunity then to ride that horse in a race and get your money back that way as a jockey. But the jockeys have said, well, it's 2025, we're not doing that anymore. We will withdraw our services from jump outs, our senior jockeys, until we get to a point where we're getting paid for it. Initially, the discussion was around that $110. The jockeys have since brought it back to $50 a ride. The ATA haven't responded to that bid yet, so there's a bit of I guess, dispute here. Next week, they'll sit down with Racing Victoria and try to resolve this. Now, for me, Tim, this is not this is an issue which we need to have a look at because it actually speaks to some of the broader challenges of the racing industry. We've got jockeys who feel like they're being a bit taken for a ride on this stuff, pardon the pun, in terms of they deserve to get paid for what they do and the principles around that. But you've got the trainers who are feeling this absolute pressure around expense of the industry at the moment. We've got a highly inflated industry where we've got trainers carrying a lot of the risk and a lot of the challenges. And the trainers, every time the trainers talk about this stuff, they go back to the fact that their business is costing them more than ever, and it's harder and harder for them to run a business. They're both demanding or asking leadership from Racing Victoria. Racing Victoria, my discussions with them are saying, well, look, this is their issue to sort out. And we don't just have, it costs them probably $2 million to make all this happen. Racing Victoria, as we know, due to their financial results, blah, 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 don't have just $2 million sitting under the table they can pull out and say, here we go, let's sort this out. That's not going to happen. So there's a whole bunch of issues in this, Tim. But I think for me, and I'm interested to hear your response on this, the level of pressure on trainers is significant at the moment, isn't it?
Absolutely. Interesting, the jump outs are now in the results, which is, finally, there's been a lot of calling for that for years. So from a punting perspective, the vision mightn't be perfect, but there's vision, there's calls, a lot of them. So effectively, they are trials without just, it's a J in front of them instead of a T. The question is, I guess, trainers probably in the old days weren't as concerned about strike rates, where now jump outs, you see it in Sydney all the time. Horses have 2 public trials. They probably had a private jump out. The New South Wales and other states have these private jump outs as well. So it's just to remain relevant as a trainer, your strike rate needs to be pretty good and be performing first up. So rather than running them into fitness, they're giving them 2 and 3 jump outs and bang, ready to go. And that comes back to cost on the owners and what trainers are willing to sacrifice, perhaps their strike rate and, even a bigger price when they are ready to win for the owners versus going, I'm striking at 15% instead of 10% for example. So, maybe there will be a shift back to that, but, at the moment, strike rate is a big marketing tool for trainers.
Yeah, it is. And I think in a world where they are trying to find an edge best way they can, it's highly competitive. We've got the big stables dominating. There's a lot of pressure on trainers to get this right and make sure it is. And there tends to be a lot of tension in this discussion. You talk to both sides of the argument, as I have. I think it's a real test of Aaron Morrison's leadership at Racing Victoria to try to find a resolution here based upon the fact that you can't have your 2 biggest participants throwing rocks at one another. I think it's a bad look, and I think longer term, if this drags on, it'll be a bit of a black eye for the industry in a time when Aaron Morrison came into the job 6 months ago talking about working with participants and all that type of stuff, and it's all good, everyone working together. But when you've got 2 participants and 2 of your most high-profile participants fighting against one another, it's not a good look for racing. Tim, we'll move on to the wagering space now. And a lot of the head honchos in the wagering industry are still relaxing, many of them on the Gold Coast. We saw a few up there last week and talked to a few of those guys sort of about how the year's looking forward. But what I thought was the guy that was probably doing more work than anybody else was Gil McLaughlin. Now, Gil's trying to keep a low profile in a sales ring is probably advised, given how busy it is at Magic Millions. Hard to keep a low profile when you're 200 centimetres tall and you're probably the most famous wagering face in the nation at the moment, in Gil McLaughlin. But he was getting around, and that was his first Magic Millions, which is kind of interesting, given his brothers sort of become the face of it. But anyway, shaking hands and kissing babies as you do in that situation. Interesting this morning, Tim, and it's breaking news this morning. Hong Kong Joint Club Chief Executive Michael Fitzsimmons has been appointed as the new head of wagering of Tabcorp. A big deal. That's his big recruit. We're probably going to see him go into that job in the next 2 to 3 months, and bringing some outside experience through Whirlpool, but he's also got significant experience back in the UK and Ireland through a variety of sort of bookmaking outfits back there. Probably brings a different skill set into the Australian environment rather than Tabcorp going into the existing corporate environment in Australia and poaching someone out of Sportsbred or Ladbrokes or one of these other guys.
Yeah, it was sort of, we were at those events or some of those events last week, Brennan, that there was an appointment mooted, and so they've confirmed it today. Will be interesting whether, there's the tax structure, as we've talked about, doesn't help the bookies, but whether too much of that British model of cutting back, punters, whether that Tabcorp continues along those lines, or they do under Gil's leadership and Michael Fitzsimmons, whether they try and bookmakes, for want of a better word, in the old model and compete on price and different things like that, and rejuvenate the tote that keeps getting brought up every month, seemingly from someone, about rejuvenating the tote, and whether that can happen, who knows? But whether employing a Whirlpool model is the answer, well, I guess Michael at least has that hands-on experience and knowledge of that.
Yeah, and I think that what is interesting is they've brought someone in with serious bookmaking and wagering chops. Like, there's probably been criticism at Tabcorp in recent years, and even with Gil coming in, that core experience around wagering may not be the key. What they do, that marketing and technology and all that type of stuff. This is someone who's going to be running the wagering division, who has got significant, proper wagering experience globally. Whether he can get his head around the Australian environment and what looks that up. Look, I think from my perspective, a strong Tabcorp and a resurgent Tabcorp with good marketing, good bookmaking skills, all those things, good wagering, infrastructure, all that sort of things, is actually really good for the industry, Tim. So, there's a lot of people sitting there going, oh, well, the old Tab, it's dying a slow death. Well, it's not good for the industry if the Tab does die away. I think, from a racing perspective, it needs to be a proper competitive environment. And what would be better than to have a competitive environment where everybody has to lift their games rather than people dying out. So it's interesting that I wrote an article earlier in the week, Tim, sort of trying to get to the bottom of the mood currently in the wagering industry, because there was a bit of a sense there that certainly with this delay in the federal government decision around advertising bans and the like, there's a bit of a sense of clouds around the wagering industry at the moment, and there was a sense that we're now not trying to get things done. It's harder to get things done and strategically, and there's a few challenges at all those big, particularly the big three bookmakers or WSPs, about where things are at. Tim, just a little bit of an insight from you. I mean, what do you feel the mood is amongst the punting public at the moment? Because they are the people whose mood are most important, because they're the people who decide if they're going to be turning over their money and creating that vibrancy within the industry.
Well, again, we're at those some of those events and spoke to some professional hunters and people that they are scaling back or becoming frustrated about able to get on, and that's that's impacting their business. What do? That effectively they've survived off the punt for a quarter of a century. Some of these people, where do they head? Is it going to the we've received emails and calls from different people over the last few months, Bren, as well. Where is this money going? If you're a punter, you're a punter. You keep punting, you don't give up altogether. Is that flowing to the black market, the illegal exchanges and things like that? So, is that where people are heading? And that's where, is that, obviously the industry doesn't receive any of those commissions or money from that. So very interesting to see where that heads, and maybe we are reaching a flashpoint.
Yeah, I think 2025 will be a decisive year for the wagering industry in Australia. It'll be very interesting to see what things look like at the end of this year compared to the start of this year. Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to our podcast, be it on Apple, Spotify, Podbean, YouTube, wherever you are. We'll be back again next week to talk through all the big issues in racing, wagering, and breeding, and we'll talk to you then.